Millionaire locked his pregnant wife in a shed. Mistress threw the key into the lake. Secrets, lies, and whispered confessions swirl around a secluded lake house. On the surface, Jonathan Redwood, a renowned millionaire with ties to global investors like Elon Musk, appears to have it all: a sprawling estate, endless wealth, and a beautiful, pregnant wife named Evelyn. Yet behind those polished doors lurks a devastating betrayal, ignited by a cunning mistress whose actions set the stage for a living nightmare. Abduction, desperation, and deceit unravel in heart-stopping sequence. Witness how ambition can twist love beyond recognition, as one unforgivable act becomes the catalyst for a revelation no one sees coming. Jonathan Redwood was born to privilege, the sole heir to the Redwood family empire that had begun with lumber but soon expanded into technology and real estate. Growing up, he seldom tasted disappointment. Tutors filled his days with lessons on economics, etiquette, and the subtle art of negotiation. His parents, Christine and Charles Redwood, mingled with diplomats and dignitaries, forging alliances that stretched from Hong Kong to London. By the age of 25, Jonathan had inherited not just a fortune, but also an uncanny ability to charm. Everyone wanted to be in his orbit, yet Jonathan's life wasn't without its losses. At 19, he lost his mother, Christine, to a sudden illness. That shaped his understanding of mortality. He believed if he could wield enough power and money, he might shield those he loved from danger. His father, Charles, retreated into work, leaving Jonathan to navigate a labyrinth of boardrooms and closed-door deals. Despite his heartbreak, Jonathan thrived in business. He attended Harvard, studying side by side with bright minds who would later become key players in Silicon Valley. While there, he rubbed shoulders with real-world visionaries, occasionally swapping entrepreneurial insights with the likes of Elon Musk himself at exclusive summits. Jonathan's charm and golden connections secured Redwood Industries a stellar reputation. He transformed Redwood Industries into a global brand, leveraging his father's real estate knowledge and forging partnerships. The Redwood name became linked with glossy city skylines and philanthropic endeavors, and Jonathan was invited to high-profile events by celebrities and philanthropic giants. With each success, his social circle expanded, so did his pride. Many admired him, many envied him, but few really understood him. His personal life, however, was less stable. Before Evelyn, his pregnant wife, there had been fleeting romances. Tabloids often snapped pictures of him with models or socialites, their faces gracing gossip columns. For Jonathan, romance always felt like yet another battlefield. If he couldn't dominate, he'd move on before he ever got hurt again. But the night he met Evelyn, a spirited woman with fiery red hair and a quiet determination, something in him shifted. He found in her an elegance distinct from the noisy glitz of the socialites around him. She was studying architecture at an elite institution, funded by scholarships and part-time jobs. They first met at a fundraiser. Jonathan saw beyond her demure smile and recognized a powerful will. Evelyn was neither hungry for his wealth nor dazzled by the Redwood aura. For him, that was exhilarating. One evening, after months of discreet courtship, Jonathan invited her to his ancestral home, the Redwood Mansion. Built by his grandfather, the mansion was a testament to old money splendor. When Evelyn arrived, she felt overwhelmed by its scale: marble floors, stained glass windows, portraits of Redwood ancestors. Jonathan, usually confident, appeared almost vulnerable before her. By the end of that visit, they had forged an emotional connection so intense it left them both breathless. Marriage soon followed. The Redwood name was no longer simply about business prosperity. Now it carried the promise of a new legacy through Evelyn. Yet, no matter how grand the Redwood mansion felt, it hid shadows in its corners. Evelyn sensed them, ignoring them at first. For reasons she couldn't name, whenever Jonathan took her on a tour of the estate, he would skip a small wooden shed in the far backyard near the lake. She only caught glimpses of it from their bedroom balcony. It was always locked. Old family storage, Jonathan would say dismissively, swiftly changing the subject. Little did Evelyn know that this inconspicuous shed by the water's edge would become her living nightmare. And, in a dark twist of fate, the unfolding story would hinge on the secrets locked away behind its door, secrets that would draw in not only Jonathan's cunning mistress, but also the unborn child Evelyn carried. In the early days of their marriage, Jonathan and Evelyn found solace in each other's company. She was a calm influence on his impulsive nature. Late-night conversations over cups of chamomile tea became their ritual, a time for both to unload the burdens of the day. Jonathan would regale her with stories from his work, his business expansions, and the deals that consumed his hours. Evelyn, in turn, spoke of her architectural passions. She had grand visions for sustainable cities, eco-friendly skyscrapers, and innovative community spaces that could shape the future. At society galas, they shone as a couple, exuding an air of unity that turned heads. The Redwood name, once overshadowed by talk of corporate mergers, was now frequently associated with the charming philanthropic duo. Journalists wrote flattering pieces about Evelyn's background, emphasizing how she rose from a modest upbringing to share a stage with billionaire philanthropists. People marveled at how naturally she slipped into her new life. Evelyn, however, didn't focus on the headlines. She was too busy designing her blueprint for happiness. Yet, beneath their harmonious veneer, a quiet loneliness nipped at Evelyn. While Jonathan showered her with gifts, an extravagant diamond necklace for her birthday, a vintage convertible, just because he was emotionally distant. At times, she felt more like an accessory to his life than a partner. She wanted deeper conversations about planning for a family, or daydreams of traveling the world together, or even small talk about how they'd spend the holidays. Instead, he'd discuss the Redwood brand or projects in remote corners of the world. To Evelyn, it sometimes seemed that Jonathan was driven by an insatiable thirst for accolades rather than genuine contentment. Despite these undertones of isolation, Evelyn found a dear friend in Marjorie Fletcher, a former journalist turned public relations specialist who managed Redwood Industries' media image. Marjorie had known Jonathan's mother, Christine, and often reminisced about her grace and wisdom. She warned Evelyn that life in the Redwood orbit was glittering but could be cold. "Power can be the loneliest currency," Marjorie confided one afternoon over lunch in a chic cafe. "Jonathan has everything, yet the one thing he fears losing most is control." Evelyn stored away those words, not fully understanding their weight. She tried to be a comforting presence for Jonathan. When the deal went sour, she left notes of encouragement by his bedside. When he doubted his next step, she listened intently. And when her pregnancy test came back positive, she believed this would be the moment they both found deeper purpose. One crisp morning, she revealed the news over breakfast. Jonathan's reaction was not exactly what she imagined. His eyes widened, and for a fleeting second, she thought she spotted fear in them. But within a heartbeat, he replaced any sign of anxiety with a radiant smile. He swept her into an embrace, whispering promises of a wonderful life for their child. The Redwood line would continue, and he would ensure that no harm ever came to them. However, in the days that followed, Evelyn sensed tension creeping in. Jonathan became more guarded, as if protecting a hidden side of himself. Discussions about the pregnancy were carefully curated, with Jonathan steering talk toward nannies, schools, and genealogical pride. The emotional connection she yearned for remained elusive. And each night, as she fell asleep, she wondered if their marriage was held together by genuine love, or by the Redwood name and the child growing inside her. If only she had known then about the other woman lurking in Jonathan's shadow, a presence poised to shatter the fragile contentment Evelyn clung to so desperately. She arrived unannounced at a Redwood Industries charity gala, gliding across the marble floor like a dark swan amidst a flock of lesser birds. Vanessa Hampton. She was a portrait of unearthly grace with her raven black hair, fitted gown, and eyes that gleamed with equal parts mischief and determination. Few in Jonathan's circle knew where she came from. Rumors swirled. Some claimed she was an heiress from old European money. Others whispered that she was a fashion mogul's daughter. The only undeniable truth was her electrifying magnetism. When she locked her gaze on someone, they found themselves irresistibly drawn. Jonathan first noticed her from across the room. Evelyn was away, chatting with a group of architects about sustainable housing. Vanessa stood alone by a pillar, her lip curled in mild amusement. She seemed entirely unimpressed by the glitz and glam of the evening. Their eyes met, and Vanessa lifted her champagne glass in a silent toast, as though they shared a private joke. Intrigued, Jonathan made his way over, effortlessly weaving through the crowd until he stood at her side. Conversation sparked. She told him she was an art curator, searching for philanthropic support for her upcoming exhibition. It involved some avant-garde approach to bridging classical styles with modern mediums. Jonathan nodded politely, half listening. He found himself more enthralled by her presence than her words. The way she carried herself reminded him of a black panther, sleek, confident, and ready to pounce. That night, something in Jonathan's carefully guarded heart cracked open. Evelyn caught him in fleeting moments, noticing how his gaze lingered on Vanessa. A pang of unease tugged at her, but she dismissed it. Jonathan had always been polite, especially with new acquaintances, especially potential business connections. Besides, Evelyn believed that love, once bestowed, remained unshakable. But for Jonathan, the allure of Vanessa was as intoxicating as fine wine. The more he learned of her, her upbringing in boarding schools across Europe, her cunning insights into human nature, the deeper he fell under her spell. Unlike Evelyn, whose moral compass was strong and unwavering, Vanessa hinted at a world without boundaries or rules. She teased Jonathan with the possibility of living outside his father's shadow, of tasting freedom from the Redwood name and its burdens. Their encounters became more frequent, often under the guise of business dinners. Vanessa would laugh at Jonathan's jokes with an abandon Evelyn never displayed, encouraging his wilder ideas. She promised him a future unshackled by expectations. "You're too great to be confined by tradition," she would whisper, her voice a velvety hush. Torn between guilt and a potent desire, Jonathan found himself leading a double life. He would hold Evelyn at night, noticing the tenderness in her eyes, yet thinking about the audacious woman who challenged every norm he'd been raised with. One evening, after a heated argument with his father about Redwood Industries' next big project, Jonathan phoned Vanessa and confided his frustrations. She offered a sympathetic ear, and in that moment, an emotional boundary was crossed. A secret affair blossomed, secret lunches, stolen kisses in parked cars, hushed phone calls at odd hours. Vanessa became Jonathan's escape from the constraints of respectability. He was enthralled by her rebelliousness and the danger she represented. He told himself he deserved this indulgence. He had sacrificed too much for the Redwood legacy to deny his own desires any longer. Yet, unbeknownst to Jonathan, Vanessa was not just a passing thrill. She had her own agenda, and her hooks were in deeper than he realized. Each clandestine encounter tightened her grip on him, fueling a sense of power that lit up her eyes whenever she saw his yearning. A slow storm brewed one that would eventually upend the Redwood household, and Evelyn, pregnant and blissfully unaware, remained at the center of it all. With the Redwood fortune came not just advantages, but also watchful eyes in every corridor. Employees, distant relatives, and business associates always hovered, eager to interpret the slightest crack in Jonathan's composure. His father, Charles Redwood, was especially perceptive. Over the course of his storied career, Charles had learned how to read people like spreadsheets, assessing risk in each flick of an eye or nervous shift in posture. So when Charles noticed a change in his son's restless energy tinged with guilt, he confronted Jonathan in the Grand Library. Floor-to-ceiling shelves brimmed with leather-bound volumes, the air thick with the scent of dust and old ambition. "Is everything all right, son?" Charles asked, leaning against the imposing oak desk. Jonathan met his father's gaze but offered little. He spoke vaguely about work pressure and overwhelming expansions. Charles listened, but suspicion lingered in the lines of his face. Meanwhile, Evelyn found her pregnancy both a source of hope and a cause for anxiety. Her doctor, Dr. Amelia Swain, insisted she rest more often, cautioning against stress. Evelyn wanted to share this miraculous phase with Jonathan, to revel in every sonogram, every flutter of life in her belly, but she felt him drifting away. At charity events, he would vanish into side conversations, returning with the faint smell of perfume that was not hers. Still, Evelyn attempted to remain optimistic. She poured her energies into designing a nursery on the mansion's second floor, carefully choosing pastel colors and safe furniture. She busied herself with philanthropic initiatives, collaborating with Marjorie Fletcher on a literacy campaign for underprivileged youth. Whenever pangs of doubt struck, she would remind herself of Jonathan's better qualities. He was generous, brilliant, and had once been so attentive to her needs. Surely, marriage had its ebbs and flows, but cracks started surfacing for everyone to see. During a dinner party that the Redwoods hosted, tension flared. Evelyn noticed Jonathan exchanging smiles with Vanessa Hampton, who had appeared uninvited but was gracefully welcomed in Redwood circles. Vanessa complimented Evelyn's choice of wine, her tone syrupy sweet. Evelyn smiled back, but a kernel of unease settled in her chest. Vanessa's gaze lingered on Jonathan a moment too long, her lips curving in a knowing smirk. Although the room buzzed with polite chatter, Evelyn felt alone in a crowd. Later that evening, she confronted Jonathan in their private suite. "Why was Vanessa here tonight?" she asked, forcing her voice to remain steady. Jonathan shrugged it off, claiming ignorance about her invitation. He insisted that he had only shared a few words with her, but even as he spoke, Evelyn felt a distance in his eyes. She fought the urge to press further, to accuse him of something more, but swallowed her suspicions. Her priority was the life growing inside her. Days rolled into weeks. In lonely hours, Evelyn's thoughts wandered to that locked shed by the lake. She vaguely recalled seeing Jonathan enter it once at dusk, carrying a small wooden box. Could it have been some Redwood family heirloom, a safe place for old secrets? She contemplated asking, but the timing always felt wrong. Instead, she reminded herself that every family estate had hidden chambers and locked doors, corners filled with dusty memories best left undisturbed. What Evelyn could never have fathomed was that inside that shed waited the seeds of her undoing. Even less could she imagine that Vanessa, whose intentions ran deeper and darker than a mere fling, would soon exploit that very place for her own twisted game. And when the time came, the shed's walls would imprison more than just ancient redwood relics. They would bind a pregnant wife to the darkest betrayal she had ever known. For Evelyn, the weeks of pregnancy ushered in unexpected changes. Not just to her body, but to her emotional landscape. Her senses felt heightened. She savored the scent of fresh flowers more deeply, cried at poignant commercials, and felt a quiet intuition growing day by day. An instinct she couldn't fully name whispered that danger lurked within her luxurious home. Yet she pushed aside these thoughts. She had a baby to protect after all, and her own well-being to maintain. Jonathan, meanwhile, became more entangled with Vanessa. Their relationship, initially fueled by physical desire, evolved into a perilous codependency. Vanessa had a talent for feeding his insecurities in such a way that he mistook her manipulations for genuine concern. Whenever he doubted his decisions at Redwood Industries, concerns about an upcoming joint venture or a new philanthropic endeavor, Vanessa stroked his ego. "You're not just Charles Redwood's son," she'd murmur. "You're Jonathan Redwood, destined to eclipse everyone else, including your father." Though guilt prickled at the corners of his mind, Jonathan found solace in Vanessa's arms. She represented escape, a world away from the Redwood legacy, from Evelyn's unwavering moral standards, from the future fatherhood that frightened him more than he cared to admit. And so, as Evelyn decorated the nursery with pastel colors, Jonathan spent late nights at Vanessa's penthouse, a glass of whiskey in hand, fueling fantasies of a life without restraint. Rumors began to circulate among the staff. Discreet glances followed Jonathan whenever he arrived home. A few maids whispered that the perfume lingering on his clothing did not belong to Evelyn. The gardener, a longtime Redwood employee, confided in Marjorie Fletcher that he'd occasionally seen Jonathan and Vanessa strolling near the lake after midnight. It was a slow leak of scandal, threatening the Redwood name. Still, outwardly, all seemed calm, until the night Evelyn discovered an earring. It lay on the passenger seat of Jonathan's sports car, glinting under the interior light like an accusation. She recognized it immediately, the earring Vanessa had worn at the last gala. With trembling fingers, Evelyn picked it up. Her mind churned with a storm of questions and denials. This couldn't be real. She swallowed back tears and confronted Jonathan the moment he returned from a supposed business dinner. He denied everything at first, claiming the earring must have been lost by a guest he'd given a ride to, but his voice trembled. Pressed by Evelyn's heartbreaking gaze, he finally admitted to a momentary lapse. Yet he insisted it was over, that it meant nothing. Evelyn, stricken, wanted to believe him. She was pregnant, vulnerable, and desperate to keep her marriage intact. In a moment that would haunt her later, she chose to forgive him, or at least try. Marjorie, upon hearing the news from a distraught Evelyn, urged caution. "Once trust is broken," she said gently, "it's like a crack in the finest porcelain. It can be repaired, but the fracture line never fully disappears." Evelyn clung to hope, determined that love and the coming child would heal their fissures. But Vanessa was not so easily dismissed. She continued her clandestine meetings with Jonathan, weaving her webs of seduction and playing on his fears of fatherhood. On more than one occasion, she hinted at the Redwood fortune that lay in wait. "Imagine what we could do with your resources," she cooed one evening, a sly smile lighting her face. "We could build an empire all our own, far from prying eyes." Jonathan, torn between his sense of duty and his craving for personal liberation, told himself he could manage both worlds. He'd keep Evelyn appeased and the Redwood name intact while secretly indulging in Vanessa's wiles. It was, of course, an illusion. Each lie built upon the last until he was entombed in a fortress of deceit. And all the while, the locked shed by the lake stood silent, awaiting its pivotal role in a game of treachery that was about to escalate beyond anyone's control. Late October's chill arrived, blanketing the Redwood estate in an eerie stillness. The lake's waters turned a steely grey, reflecting the somber atmosphere that had settled over the mansion. Evelyn was well into her second trimester. Despite her emotional turmoil, she forced herself to concentrate on her health, prenatal vitamins, gentle yoga, and rest. She tried not to dwell on the shifting glances of the household staff or the shadows under Jonathan's eyes. Jonathan, for his part, grew distant. He spent hours locked in his study, poring over financial statements or speaking in hushed tones on his phone. Whenever Evelyn passed by, she caught fragments of tense conversations. More than once, she heard Vanessa's name. She yearned to confront him, but the dread of unraveling another ugly truth tethered her into silence. One evening, she found him gazing out the window toward the lake. The moon cast a pale glow, highlighting the outline of the locked shed. The question she had buried for months finally surfaced. "What's inside that shed, Jonathan? Her voice quivered, but she maintained eye contact. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Family memorabilia," he answered, too quickly. "It's nothing important." She sensed the lie, but said nothing, unwilling to spark another fight. The tension between them coiled like a spring, ready to snap. The estate, once a symbol of wealth and comfort, now felt like a gilded cage. Across town, Vanessa's machinations intensified. She made unannounced visits to Redwood Industries, brazenly strolling past board members who exchanged cautious glances. She'd sweep into Jonathan's office, settle into the plush chair opposite his desk, and speak of lavish plans, estates in Monaco, private islands, an empire that dwarfed the Redwood legacy. Sometimes she brought up Evelyn, ridiculing her good girl persona. "She's too innocent," Vanessa purred one afternoon. "She doesn't understand what it takes to survive in our world." Though her cruelty pricked Jonathan's conscience, he couldn't help feeling validated by her rebellious spirit. Deep inside, he recognized how precarious his position had become. He still cared for Evelyn, and he certainly cared for his unborn child, but he couldn't extricate himself from Vanessa's snare. Every stolen moment with Vanessa felt like stepping out of time, out of the Redwood obligations that defined him. It wasn't long before Vanessa pressed further. She confronted Jonathan about Evelyn's pregnancy, eyes gleaming with a dangerous light. "What if the baby changes everything?" she asked, her tone sharper than usual. "Would you choose your child over the future we talked about?" The question echoed in his mind. Fear twisted his stomach. Part of him wanted to be a good father, to stand by Evelyn, but another part craved the freedom Vanessa promised, a freedom he had never tasted. Meanwhile, Evelyn's isolation deepened. Most nights, Jonathan retreated to a separate bedroom, claiming he didn't want to disturb her sleep. She heard him pacing behind closed doors, sometimes muttering to himself. In the quiet emptiness of the master suite, she would rest a hand on her belly and pray that her child would not grow up amid secrets and lies. She found fleeting comfort in phone calls with her sister, Grace, who lived abroad. Grace sensed the strain in Evelyn's voice and begged her to seek help, but Evelyn felt trapped by the Redwood image. Public scandal could tarnish Jonathan's business and overshadow her unborn child's future. A turning point came when Marjorie Fletcher requested a private meeting with Evelyn. Over tea in the smaller drawing room, Marjorie revealed that she had caught Vanessa sneaking out of Jonathan's office late at night. "Evelyn," she said softly, "whatever is happening isn't going to end well. You need to protect yourself and the baby." Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes. She nodded, but she still couldn't articulate her next move. It was then that Evelyn decided, with trembling resolve, to discover the truth behind the locked shed. If Jonathan wouldn't share his secrets, she would uncover them herself, even if it meant confronting the shadows that had plagued her dreams. Little did she know that her decision would set in motion a chain of events leading to a night of unimaginable betrayal. The day Evelyn planned to explore the shed arrived with an overcast sky and a cold wind sweeping across the lake. She waited until Jonathan was out, presumably entangled in yet another meeting, and ventured through the sprawling backyard. The shed was smaller up close, its wooden walls streaked with moss. The rusted lock and the thick chain reinforced the impression of a place meant to keep people out or perhaps keep something in. No one was around. Mustering courage, she tried the door, but it remained secure. She circled the structure, peering in through a grimy window. Inside, she glimpsed shapes covered in dust sheets, furniture, boxes, and something that looked like an antique trunk. Her heart pounded. She had hoped the door might be unlocked, allowing her to slip inside discreetly. But with no key and no immediate plan to force entry, she retreated. That same evening, Vanessa arrived unexpectedly at the Redwood mansion, carrying a small gift bag. She slipped past the gates under the ruse of delivering something urgent to Jonathan. The staff, trained to accommodate important guests, didn't question her. She strolled into the foyer as though she belonged there. Evelyn, descending the grand staircase, froze at the sight of her rival. For a long, taut moment, the two women stared at each other, Vanessa's lips twisted into a predatory smile. "I brought Jonathan some documents," she said, her tone dripping with self-assurance. Evelyn forced composure, her mind spinning. "He's not home," she replied, voice strained. "You can leave them with me." Vanessa held onto the bag, ignoring Evelyn's outstretched hand. "I'll wait for him then," she said, stepping around Evelyn and heading toward the study. Never had Evelyn felt such helpless fury. This was her home, her sanctuary, yet Vanessa strutted inside like a mistress, claiming her territory. Something inside Evelyn shifted, a steely resolve hardening her spine. She followed Vanessa into the study. "Why are you really here?" she demanded. The click of the study door echoed like a gunshot. Vanessa locked eyes with Evelyn, and for a moment her facade cracked, revealing raw ambition. "I'm not here to explain myself to you," she said quietly. "Jonathan's made his choices, and I'm part of that." Evelyn's cheeks burned. She wanted to scream, to throw Vanessa out, but she remembered the redwood image, the unborn child, the swirling rumors. She wavered in silence, and Vanessa seized the upper hand. When Jonathan finally returned, he walked in on a standoff. Vanessa stood near the fireplace, arms crossed, while Evelyn hovered by the door, trembling with pent-up outrage. He froze, guilt splashed across his face. Sensing her advantage, Vanessa tossed the gift bag onto the desk. "Your documents," she said icily, turning to leave. At the doorway, she paused, shooting Evelyn a look of triumph before disappearing into the corridor. Evelyn rounded on Jonathan, tears brimming. "How could you let her walk in here like that?" she whispered. Jonathan stammered, fumbling for excuses. He insisted it was all business, that Vanessa's presence was a miscommunication, but the air rang hollow with lies. Frustration and pain overwhelmed Evelyn. She stormed from the room, ignoring Jonathan's pleas. Upstairs, she locked herself in the nursery, gazing at the half-finished decor meant for their child. Alone, she wept, the baby's soft kicks a reminder of all she had at stake. In a swirl of sorrow, she realized her illusions were crumbling. She needed answers, and the shed might hold them. One way or another, she would find its key. Across town, Vanessa indulged in a self-congratulatory glass of champagne. She replayed the confrontation in her mind, savoring every moment of Evelyn's helplessness. Now, more than ever, Vanessa believed she was inches from tipping the Redwood dynasty into her hands. The question was how far she'd go to make that dream a reality. Jonathan found himself torn between two conflicting worlds. On one side was Evelyn, his wife, and the soon-to-be mother of his child, whose faith in him was fracturing under the weight of repeated betrayals. On the other stood Vanessa, whose allure was undeniable, a heady mix of ambition, rebellion, and passionate intensity. Each passing day, Jonathan sank deeper into the quicksand of his own duplicity, and every attempt to appease both women only drew him further into chaos. Meanwhile, Evelyn's resolve to uncover the contents of the shed hardened. She confided in Marjorie Fletcher, who advised caution but understood Evelyn's desperation. Early one frosty morning, with Jonathan away on business, Evelyn approached the mansion's caretaker, Mr. Alden Reeves, a long-time Redwood employee who had known the estate's secrets for decades. "That shed?" he murmured, his weathered face creasing in unease. "Your husband keeps it locked for a reason, Miss S. Redwood." Evelyn pressed him, her eyes pleading. Slowly, Mr. Reeves retrieved a thick ring of keys from his pocket. He hesitated. "I shouldn't be giving you this," he said, singling out a small brass key. "But you have a right to know your own home." Heart-pounding, Evelyn thanked him. She clutched the key as though it were her lifeline, resolving to slip into the shed later that night. Her plan, however, was derailed by Jonathan's unexpected return. He arrived at the estate in a cloud of tension, raking his hands through his hair and muttering about urgent matters. Evelyn tucked the key into her pocket, determined to keep her intentions hidden. That evening, as Jonathan paced the living room, she finally summoned the courage to confront him. "Jonathan," she began quietly, "I need to know what you're hiding inside that shed, and with Vanessa." His eyes flitted to the window, where moonlight touched the distant shed's roof. For a moment, he considered lying again, but something about Evelyn's trembling posture and the unconditional warmth in her gaze made him falter. "It's old redwood documents," he said at last. "Papers my father never wanted to see the light of day. Some questionable dealings, bribes, hush money, the sorts of things that could ruin the family name. Though it wasn't the entire truth, it was enough to unnerve Evelyn. She had always known the Redwood Empire was built on cunning deals, but hearing confirmation from Jonathan's lips felt like stepping into a moral abyss. "What about Vanessa?" she pressed. Silence thickened the air. Jonathan opened his mouth, but no words came. At length he mumbled, "She's a mistake I can't seem to undo." Before Evelyn could respond, a maid entered, announcing that Vanessa was at the door, demanding to see Jonathan. Evelyn turned pale. Jonathan cursed under his breath, glancing at his wife as if pleading for understanding. She stared at him in disbelieving shock. With a sigh, Jonathan went to meet Vanessa in the foyer. Evelyn followed at a distance. She watched from the staircase as Vanessa hissed something heatedly. Though she couldn't catch the exact words, Vanessa's tone was urgent, bordering on frantic. Jonathan tried to usher her away from the prying eyes of the staff, but Vanessa's voice carried, "I'm tired of sneaking around." In a moment of unbridled fury, Vanessa marched past Jonathan and stormed toward the back door, presumably aiming for the lakefront. Jonathan chased after her, leaving a stunned Evelyn in the corridor. The staff exchanged uneasy glances, and Marjorie, who happened to be passing by, placed a reassuring hand on Evelyn's shoulder. "Stay here," Marjorie urged. "Let them sort it out." But Evelyn couldn't stand idle. Heart pounding, she hurried after them, stepping out into the cold night. Wind sliced through the garden, rustling the rose bushes. Up ahead, near the shed, Vanessa and Jonathan argued in hushed, frantic voices. Evelyn crept closer, remaining hidden behind a row of hedges. Suddenly, Vanessa seized something from Jonathan's hand, a glint of metal under the moonlight, and hurled it into the lake. A soft splash echoed across the water. Evelyn's stomach twisted in dread. She recognized the ring of keys. Whatever secrets were trapped behind that locked door, Vanessa had just ensured that Evelyn and possibly even Jonathan would be denied access. The mistress had literally thrown the key to the redwood mysteries into the black depths of the lake, sealing them beneath the moonlit ripples. And Evelyn, trembling with the weight of betrayal, realized this was only the beginning of a far darker chapter. Long after Vanessa hurled the keys into the lake, the tension in the Redwood mansion refused to subside. Jonathan returned with a stormy face, avoiding Evelyn's wide-eyed questions. "I'll fix this," he muttered, slamming the study door behind him. Vanessa had left in a frenzy of anger and triumph, leaving the household staff buzzing with gossip. Alone in her bedroom, Evelyn felt trapped by endless uncertainties about Jonathan's loyalties, Vanessa's intentions, and the secrets of the shed now locked behind the icy waters. Time crawled, and Evelyn's pregnancy advanced. She fought to appear collected around the staff and her occasional visitors, but her eyes betrayed exhaustion. Night after night, she dreamt of drowning in the lake, the sunken keys just out of reach. Whenever she awakened, her baby's gentle kicks reminded her she had to stay strong. Yet Jonathan's emotional absence gnawed at her. He rarely slept in their shared bed, preferring the solitude of his study or, worse, clandestine outings with Vanessa. Marjorie Fletcher, concerned for Evelyn's well-being, took the initiative to arrange a small baby shower, a modest gathering, with only a few trusted friends. Her hope was to rekindle some warmth in the Redwood home. On a chilly afternoon, the living room filled with soft laughter and pastel decorations. For a brief moment, Evelyn felt almost normal, accepting congratulations and unwrapping gifts. But Jonathan was conspicuously absent, lost to some urgent matter. Halfway through the party, he finally made an appearance. Stress lines etched his brow, and his phone rang incessantly. Fumbling through a terse apology, he left nearly as soon as he arrived. Unspoken tension cast a pall over the festivities. The guests, sensing the awkwardness, politely made their excuses and drifted away, leaving Evelyn humiliated and heartbroken. Late that night, Evelyn confronted Jonathan in the corridor leading to his study. Rage filled her voice. "I'm done pretending this is normal," she spat, tears brimming in her eyes. "We're about to bring a child into this world, and you can't even spend an hour by my side." Jonathan's temper flared in response. "Don't talk to me about obligations," he roared. "I'm under constant pressure deals, reputations, scandals. You have no idea what it's like to be me." Their argument escalated. Evelyn accused him of abandoning her, of letting Vanessa disrupt their lives. Jonathan hurled back complaints of feeling suffocated by expectations. The fight culminated in a reckless moment of impulsive rage. Seeing the brass key still missing, feeling cornered by Evelyn's accusations, Jonathan seized her wrist and dragged her out of the mansion, across the damp lawn. Evelyn resisted, demanding to know where he was taking her, but Jonathan didn't answer. The moonlight revealed his unsteady, furious gaze. They stopped before the shed. "You want to see what's inside so badly?" he snarled. "Fine." In a burst of force, he shoved Evelyn inside, slamming the door behind her. She stumbled on dusty crates, her pregnant belly lurching with panic. Horror flooded her senses. The interior smelled of mold and old secrets. Stacks of boxes and antique furniture loomed in the gloom. Evelyn screamed, pleading for Jonathan to come to his senses. On the other side of the door, she heard his shallow breathing, as though he too was terrified of what he'd just done. But pride and fury overpowered remorse. He snapped a spare padlock shut. Then footsteps thudded away, leaving Evelyn alone in the darkness. Outside, Jonathan stood numbly, the gravity of his act settling upon him. He glanced at the lake where the key had been thrown. Panic twisted his gut. He had no intention of actually harming Evelyn. Fury had blinded him. Now he'd locked his pregnant wife in a freezing shed with no immediate way out. For a long moment he remained frozen, unsure whether to retrieve bolt cutters from the garage or to call for help. But he couldn't face the shameful truth. He had crossed an unforgivable line. Minutes later, a figure emerged from behind the oak trees. Vanessa approached, her expression calculating. "What have you done?" she whispered, voice tinged with perverse fascination. Jonathan mumbled incoherently about losing control, about retrieving tools to free Evelyn. Vanessa shook her head, stepping close to him. "Is that what you really want?" she whispered, a seductive edge in her tone. "She's in your way, always has been." Jonathan blinked, horror mounting. "No," he croaked. "I never meant." But Vanessa silenced him, placing a finger over his lips. "Some mistakes can't be undone," she said quietly. Then, taking advantage of his dazed state, she tugged his arm, leading him away from the shed. "Come," she coaxed. "We'll figure out a story. You just need time to think." In the moonlit yard, the padlock gleamed ominously on the shed door, and inside Evelyn, trembling from the cold and racked with sobs, realized that Jonathan Redwood, the father of her child, had willingly imprisoned her. The shadows danced around old redwood artifacts, mocking her plight. She sank to her knees on the dusty floor, terror and heartbreak coursing through her. She was trapped, and the only key lay at the bottom of the lake. Locked away in the shed, Evelyn's body shook with cold and terror. The unborn child shifted inside her, as though sensing her distress. She tried shouting for help, pounding on the door until her knuckles were raw, but the sprawling estate seemed silent to her cries. Hours passed in agonizing stillness. Her throat turned hoarse, and her head throbbed from lack of proper rest. Inside the mansion, Jonathan paced the halls like a restless ghost. Panic roiled in his chest each time he remembered what he had done. Still, Vanessa hovered, urging him to stay calm, to think of the bigger picture. She promised they would release Evelyn once they had time to spin a convincing explanation, perhaps claim that Evelyn had wandered off in a distraught state. But Jonathan's conscience gnawed at him. He imagined the temperature dropping in the shed, imagined Evelyn pleading for their child's safety. At last, he broke away from Vanessa's persuasive hold. "I can't do this," he muttered. He rushed to the garage and rummaged through the tools, hands shaking until he found a pair of heavy bolt cutters. Clutching them, he sprinted across the yard, ignoring Vanessa's protests. When he reached the shed, he froze. The padlock still hung cold and immovable. On the other side, he heard Evelyn's faint sobs. "Evelyn!" he shouted, tears stinging his eyes. "Stand back!" With trembling arms, he snapped the padlock off. The door creaked open, revealing his wife on the ground, her face ashen. She gasped for breath, mustering what little energy she had to glare at him. "How?" she began, voice cracking. "How could you do this?" Jonathan sank to his knees, sobbing. "I lost control," he choked. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Evelyn recoiled from his touch, her heart torn between relief and a fury that burned with new ferocity. But her weakened body took priority. She needed warmth, medical attention, reassurance for the baby. Jonathan gently lifted her, carrying her into the mansion. Vanessa stood by the back door, watching with narrowed eyes. For a split second, Evelyn thought Vanessa would gloat or protest. Instead, she turned on her heel, disappearing into the darkness. Evelyn was rushed to a hospital in the early morning hours. Tests confirmed the baby was still safe, albeit the stress had taken its toll. Marjorie arrived soon after, offering support. Amid tears and heartbreak, Evelyn recounted the ordeal. Medical staff, upon hearing of potential domestic abuse, urged her to involve the authorities. Unsure of whom to trust, Evelyn hesitated, but she recognized that silence would only perpetuate the cycle of violence. Across town, Vanessa realized her carefully orchestrated plan was collapsing. The Redwood brand would soon be under scrutiny, and Jonathan was perilously close to a breakdown. Unwilling to let her ambitions be derailed, she hatched a last-ditch scheme to manipulate the public narrative, perhaps presenting Evelyn as an unstable wife. But her efforts were thwarted when Marjorie, suspecting Vanessa's twisted game, leaked evidence of Vanessa's involvement to a confidant in the local press. A hush fell over Redwood Industries as scandal threatened to erupt in headlines. Jonathan, racked by guilt and fear, tried to see Evelyn in the hospital. She agreed on one condition, that he tell her the entire truth about everything Vanessa, the Redwood family's illicit deals, and the hidden secrets. Unable to bear the weight any longer, Jonathan revealed it all. The Redwood Empire had been built, in part, on bribes and unethical practices. Charles Redwood had demanded secrecy, locking away incriminating documents in that shed. Over the years, Jonathan had contributed his own set of misdeeds to the Redwood archive, forging deals that compromised others. Vanessa, in her ruthless ambition, had threatened to expose or misuse those secrets. In his desperation to keep both his legacy and illicit affair, he had nearly destroyed his marriage and almost risked his child's life. Evelyn listened, tears streaming. She felt nauseated by the betrayal, yet a pang of sorrow for Jonathan's brokenness stirred within her. Then she summoned every ounce of resolve she had left. "We can't go back," she said. "If I stay silent, it means allowing this nightmare to repeat. Our child deserves a better legacy." Within days, Evelyn took steps to secure her future and that of her baby separate from Jonathan. She involved legal counsel, quietly building a case for divorce. She also granted an exclusive interview to a trusted journalist, setting the story straight about Vanessa's manipulations and Jonathan's unforgivable act. Despite the Redwood lawyers scrambling to contain the damage, the public learned the truth in a series of unfolding articles that rocked Redwood Industries to its core. Vanessa, facing the collapse of her carefully laid plans, attempted to flee the country, but allegations of conspiracy and blackmail followed her. Investigators discovered the suspicious financial records that linked her to Redwood hush funds. International authorities flagged her passport. The woman who once flaunted her style at charity galas ended up cornered by her own greed, her empire of illusions crumbling. As for Jonathan Redwood, his legacy stood on the brink of ruin. The Redwood board, alarmed by the media outrage, ousted him from his leadership position pending further investigation. Stripped of the power that had defined him, he confronted the hollowness at his core. For the first time in his life, he grappled with remorse. Real remorse, not the fleeting pang of a minor transgression, but the searing regret of nearly destroying the one person who once believed in him wholeheartedly. Evelyn, buoyed by the support of Marjorie and her sister Grace, moved into a modest but welcoming cottage near the town centre. There, she focused on rebuilding her life, preparing to raise her child in an environment free from deceit and cruelty. She attended every prenatal appointment, engaged in calming routines, and allowed herself moments of quiet reflection to heal. Months later, under a bright spring sun, Evelyn gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Michael. Holding him in her arms, she felt an overwhelming wave of love, tempered by the hardships she had endured. Although Jonathan reached out, wanting to see his son, Evelyn remained cautious. She did not refuse him outright, but she made it clear that trust would be earned, not freely given. Whether Jonathan would change for the better was a question only time could answer. For now, Evelyn took solace in the life she had reclaimed. In her quiet cottage, she often gazed out the window at a tranquil garden. No locked sheds, no hidden keys. Just open space for her child to grow and for her own heart to mend. The Redwood Empire, once towering and unassailable, had been shaken to its core. But Evelyn found hope in that rubble, hope that sometimes, from the darkest betrayals, one can forge a future illuminated by truth and resilience. From hidden sheds to keys sunk in a cold lake, Evelyn's nightmare highlights the perilous dance between love, ambition, and betrayal. Her harrowing ordeal proves that no fortune or promise of grandeur can outweigh true honesty and genuine compassion. Ultimately, it's Evelyn's courage that stands out. She refuses to remain silent or let her child inherit a world built on deceit. Instead, she reclaims her future and paves the way for a brighter tomorrow grounded in truth. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, be sure to hit that like button. Share it with friends who crave suspenseful, emotional narratives. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories brimming with high-stakes drama, moral dilemmas, and inspiring resolutions. Your engagement fuels our passion to create captivating content. Thank you for being part of this journey, and stay tuned for more tales that explore the depths of the human heart.